Hello, welcome to Music Theory Part 3. In Part 2, we began learning about chords. In Part 3, we'll go a step further with seventh chords, as well as learning about the modes. Let's get right into it. Seventh chords are like triads, but with an additional third interval. If we take a C major triad, C, E, G, and add a major third above that, B, we get a C major seventh chord. It is a major seventh chord because both the triad and the seventh are major. A major triad with a minor seventh is called a dominant seventh chord. For example, C, E, G, B flat would be a C dominant seventh chord. In jazz terminology, these are simply referred to as seven chords, as in C7. Minor triads with a minor seventh are referred to as minor seventh chords. A diminished triad with a minor seventh has two names, one being half diminished and the other being minor 7 flat 5. A fully diminished chord is a diminished triad with a diminished seventh. A diminished seventh is lowered by a whole step from the major seventh. So C to B is a major seventh, C to B flat is a minor seventh, and C to B double flat is a diminished seventh. When spelling out a diminished chord, though, we rewrite the diminished seventh as a major sixth, as in C to A, so that a diminished seventh chord would be spelled C, E flat, G flat, A. Notice that the diminished chord is comprised of all minor third intervals. We will talk more about diminished in a future lesson on symmetrical scales and harmony. An augmented triad with a major seventh is called augmented major seventh. An augmented chord with a minor seventh is called augmented seventh. Because there are 4 notes in a seventh chord, there are 4 inversions: root, first, second, and third inversion. Now that we know about seventh chords, let's go through the diatonic chord progression in C major. C major 7, D minor 7, E minor 7, F major 7, G dominant 7, A minor 7, B half diminished. If we were to write these as Roman numerals, we may do so in such a manner: 1 major 7, 2 minor 7, 3 minor 7, 4 major 7, 5 7, 6 minor 7, 7 minor 7 flat 5, or 7 half diminished. Instead of using classical numerology, which denotes minor chords with lowercase Roman numerals, I'm using all uppercase as is done with jazz and pop music analysis. The 5-7 chord has a very special function that needs to be mentioned. Notice in the 5-7 chord, there is a tritone interval between the third and the seventh of the chord. The dissonance of this interval creates a desire or expectation for a resolution to a more consonant interval, which would be found in the 1 chord. The other chords in the diatonic chord progression have their own functions, but the 5-7 and 1 chord are what really establish the tonal center. This will be further elaborated on in future lessons. With seventh chords covered, let's talk about the modes. The modes are scales which are created by starting and ending on various degrees of a parent scale, in this case, the major scale. The modes in C major would be as follows. C to C is of course the major scale, but its modal name is Ionian. D to D is called Dorian. E to E is called Phrygian. F to F is called Lydian. G to G is called Mixolydian. A to A is called Aeolian, but is more commonly referred to as the natural minor scale. And B to B is called Locrian. As you can hear, every mode has a distinct sound when played as its own tonality. This is called modal harmony, and I will cover this more in future lessons. When replicating modes in other keys, musicians often memorize the scale degrees of the modes to make transposing easier. For example, Dorian has a lowered third and a lowered seventh. Phrygian has a lowered second, lowered third, lowered sixth, and lowered seventh. Lydian has a raised fourth. Mixolydian has a lowered seventh. Aeolian has a lowered third, lowered sixth, and lowered seventh. Locrian has a lowered second, lowered third, lowered fifth, lowered sixth, and lowered seventh. As you can see, there is a correlation between the diatonic chord progression and the modes. Every chord has its own scale, and every scale its own chord. This will become even more apparent in our next lesson when we talk about extensions, altered harmony, and the minor scales. Make sure you are comfortable with the information up to this point before moving on to the next lesson. In the meantime, happy practicing!